Our speaker today is internationally known. He does speaking assignments all around the world. He has done speaking engagements in 49 of the 50 states. Michael Angelo Caruso is also an author, has published several books, and he does training for a variety of companies, including Verizon, Time Warner Cable, and many other Fortune 500 companies. We're very fortunate to have such a high-quality speaker with us here today, and so Michael was born and raised in Trenton, lived in Royal Oak for a while, and currently lives in Rochester. So we're very pleased to have Michael Angelo Caruso be here with us today.
You could use this one while when we're not doing Q&A. Good morning, everybody. How are we? I always get introduced as a really good speaker, but I'm a pretty good listener too. Why doesn't anybody ever say that, Paul? I'm so glad to be here for a number of reasons. As an event-based speaker, guess how many gigs I've had in the last 10 months? I was on the road in March of last year, and I couldn't travel to my gigs fast enough to finish the tour. It canceled, you know, the dates were canceling in real time. You guys remember like March 10th when we were just trying to figure this thing out, and people didn't really know what we were into. And I was at one event on a Friday night, Thursday night, 100% attendance. Everybody that was supposed to come came. I don't know if that was March 9th. On the next day, 50% attendance. And the next day was canceled. And that's like that. The wheels are falling off the wagon. You all went through the same thing, had similar stories, I know. We have a very low impact program for you today. I hope that we'll give you some things to think about, but it'll be the easiest session you'll attend in a while. I'll do most of the heavy lifting. But I think the strategy here was that Paul and the team wanted to give you something to kind of relax into, some conversation that maybe is less stressful than some of the things that you've been going through. It's been such a tough year especially for municipalities. I don't usually do government work, and I have gotten more calls from municipalities because they've been through it all with work at home, elections, community members who are all torqued out of shape because of COVID, a lot of people self-medicating now. I mean, the chain reaction to this thing has been really quite extraordinary. And so maybe it's a good idea to just kind of stop everything for a minute and just chat and talk and have some fun and think of each other as, you know, just people, just people on the same team trying to do good work, which is really what the City of Plymouth is all about. I'm fond of the City of Plymouth. I've been to your ice sculpture. What's it called? Ice? I don't come that often. I live in Rochester, so it's a bit of a drive, but I'm a fan. And such a beautiful community, nice quiet community. You guys never cause anybody trouble. A police guy goes, no, that's not true exactly. And it's just good to be out of the house is what I'm saying after all this time. A lot of my work is virtual now. So I came up through the music business, and I played in a performing rock band for a long time. In fact, we played your ice sculpture thing years and years ago. My last name is Caruso. We had 4 brothers in the band, so we're called the Caruso Brothers. And that's when I first became aware of the City of Plymouth, because I did grow up in Trenton. Plymouth was like on the other side of the planet. And I've been a fan ever since. We played the Livonia Spree many times. We've been to the West Side a few times. So then I started getting these calls to do municipalities. One was in Chatham, Kent, so it was in Ontario. And I did something for the Sterling Heights Council not long ago, and now the City of Plymouth. And I guess it's because the cities have been through a lot, so it's my pleasure to be here today. We're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about teams and how they work. I'm not creating policy today. I'm going to tell you some interesting stories. And that's it. We're just going to say we had a good morning together. So if you're expecting some sort of propaganda or sales pitch, I don't have one for you. And nobody's told me what to say today. They just said, come in and do a good job for our people. We want to treat them to something special. And I said, great, I'm there. Quick little thing, it has nothing to do with anything. Does anybody know the name Hal Holbrook? Hal Holbrook. Very good. Who is he? Oh, okay. Apparently more than one Hal Holbrook in the world. Yes. So there's a local Hal Holbrook? Local guy? No kidding. And he's still alive? Oh, okay. So the Hal Holbrook I'm referring to is the famous actor, and he died last week. And I was thinking about it because I had the good fortune of meeting Hal Holbrook. And it's the strangest thing. It's on my mind because it just happened that he just died. And I'm at an airport waiting to board a flight, and this guy kind of walks in. And you know, some people walk into the room and you just know there's somebody, right? I mean, celebrity kind of person. I think everybody's somebody. But some people just walk into the room and your eyes go to them and you just know they've got a story. I didn't know who he was at first. He's got this big white shock of hair. And I'd seen him in a few things. I know he played Mark Twain for a long time in a play. He won, I think, an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor in a movie, Into the Wild. Anybody see the movie Into the Wild? Yeah, loved it. Which is the John Krakauer book about this kid that goes to Alaska to find himself or live on his own. It's not a good ending for the kid. I won't spoil it for you, but check out the movie or the book. And he played the kid's mentor in the movie, Hal Holbrook did. Anyway, because I came up through the music business, I kind of gravitate toward people that do interesting things. And I don't know if anybody else in the airport terminal recognized Mr. Holbrook, but I'm like, I'd like to meet him. And I'm by myself, so there's nobody to do it but me. And I just learned how to do this when I was young. I'll tell you my secret in just a minute. But I walked up to him, and he was traveling with a woman, I assume a secretary or maybe staffer of some sort. And I said, excuse me for interrupting, because they were talking. And I said, are you Hal Holbrook? And he looked up and he said, and you get this kind of like mixed signal, like he was partly glad to be recognized and partly pissed that I interrupted him because they were talking business. But he was gracious, which I was kind of hoping would be the case. It's not always the case, but he was gracious. And I said, sorry to interrupt, sir. I won't be but a minute. I just wanted to say hello. My name is Michael Caruso. I'm traveling from Michigan. I'm a big fan of yours. And I just want to thank you for keeping the bar high in the film business, whatever nonsense I said. You know, when you meet somebody, sometimes you just start babbling. And he was so gracious. He's probably heard this a million times. It's the famous line that you use with a musician. I've got all your albums. What's he going to say to that? Lots of people do, you know. So he goes, well, nice to meet you. And then I'm like such a fanboy. I go like, could I trouble you for a photograph? Because we don't ask for autographs anymore, but selfie or a toofy is going to be good, right? And he was so gracious. You know, he stood up, and I'm sure he didn't want to stand up. He's an older guy, and he stood up, and we took a picture, and I'll never forget how nice he was to me. He didn't have to be. He just was. You know, it was a nice little moment. And then, and that's it. I have the picture now as a keepsake, and when he passed away, I thought to myself, what a great guy, and I hope he didn't suffer long, and that's it. And we're going to talk about something called empathy in a minute, and how important it is to being a human being and a good citizen and a good employee for the City of Plymouth. But along the way, I thought, well, I wonder if you guys have met any famous people. Has anybody met anybody famous in your life? Didn't have to be recently. Traveling? Who'd you meet? You met Glenn Campbell. Arnold Palmer? How do you meet so many famous people? Steve Eiserman? He's not so hard because he's local. But I'm a big fan of Glenn Campbell. And when he got Alzheimer's and then went on the road with his family, there's a touching video of Glenn Campbell playing Gentle on My Mind and forgetting the chords. We think sometimes about Alzheimer's, you know, they forget to eat or they forget your name. But here he is, a working musician, and he's forgetting the chords to a song he's played for 40 years. And the audience does not want their money back because they've seen the great Glenn Campbell. And he's falling apart before their eyes, and they paid to see it. And they were so glad they went. It was a very strange situation when he went on the road. Wow. And Arnold Palmer. That's cool. Arnold Palmer, the famous drink Arnold Palmer, he actually invented it. That's a weird thing. Oh, you got a twofer. You met Arnold Palmer and Glenn Campbell at the same event. How cool is that? And you met O.J. Simpson. What year was this? Yeah, 89 or 90. Was this before the killing? Yeah. Oh, wow. His wife was with him. I'll repeat for you because we're recording and maybe some of you can't hear. That was a nice day for you, man. Meet so many famous people. Anybody else meet anybody famous? Local? Film? Politics? Who do you got? Ken Burns, the guy from, well, he's done so many PBS specials. You went to a book signing? Locally? Where? No kidding. You were there. Yeah. Well, at book signing, you have to be. People are buying your stuff, and you take. I think that's part of it. He signed. You might even get a picture. Did you get a picture? Yeah, that's cool. Was that your first time to Mount Rushmore? You've been there before. That is an amazing thing. How many have been to Mount Rushmore? That is an amazing thing. And I felt the same way at Mount Rushmore that I did when I went to Alaska, which I've been to 5 times now, which is patriotic. Something about going made me feel patriotic. It was beautiful. You feel that way when you went to Mount Rushmore? It's stunning. There's nothing like it in the world. When you see, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. It's a crazy story about the one guy that chiseled the thing, and I guess he went crazy, and they had all kinds of labor problems. It was just a production. Somebody here probably knows more about that than I do. Anybody else? Any famous interactions? Who'd you meet? Gordie Howe. Holy crap. Local, yeah. Mr. Hockey. What was the event? Holy crap. Legendary guy, man. Gordie Howe. And they're supposed to name the new bridge after him, yeah? Gordie Howe. Back when they didn't wear helmets. Or anything, really. Yeah. Yeah, moments. It's interesting. People are interesting. We always think famous people are more interesting than everybody else, but the truth is you're more interesting than most famous people. And you're most interesting. You're more interesting. And you're more interesting. Everybody's got a story, but we don't seek out the stories of people around us. Sometimes we work with somebody 2,000 hours a year. We don't know anything about them. We don't know their kids' names. We don't know what they like to do for fun. But we go all fanboy on celebrities. We know everything about them, people we'd never meet. It's interesting. I told you earlier that I'm a big fan of meeting people, and on a normal day, non-pandemic day, I would have met 75% of you before the program, so I'll apologize for that, but I would have done the same trick that I did to meet Mr. Holbrook. I would have walked up to you in your seat and said, hey, sorry to interrupt. My name's Michael. I'm your speaker today, and I just want to say hi before we start the program. And probably shake your hand. I don't know if we're going to go back to that stuff anymore, but that was my old routine. I like doing it. I like learning people's stories. I'm interested in people. And I got that from my dad, who had a great little life skill. My dad, my dad used to say that if you meet somebody and they don't remember meeting you, it's the worst insult ever. So my dad worked really hard at first impressions. Like if you met my dad, you'd never forget. Not because he was weird or eccentric. He was just that memorable, you know. And even when I was single for a long time, I'm engaged to be married now to the redhead, and things are great. But man, and the auditions are over. But I was single for so long, and my guy friends loved going out with me to the bar because I was fearless, man. I would walk up to anybody and introduce myself. Those are the days, you know. And one day, my guys pulled me aside and they said, "What's up with you, man? Where'd you get this ability to do this?" Because it was like, I don't know what happens to men and guys and boys really in school, you know, when you have to walk all the way across the room to ask a woman to dance. And if she says no, what do you have to do? You got to walk all the way back again to your mates, and you know what they're going to ask you. What'd she say? You know, and then she said no, and you know, you're like this the rest of the night. You just can't pull yourself out of it. I never had that, probably thanks to the music business. And my mates one time pulled me aside and they said, how does it you can walk across the room and introduce yourself to people you've never met before? And I said, I think everybody wants to meet me. And I guess I got it from the band days, because when we were in the band, it was true. If you either wanted to be in the band or you wanted to meet the band. It was just the thing if you were in the music business. But when I talk to people about this, I always remind people, I think everybody wants to meet you too. If you have a problem in your home and the police come, they want to meet you. And if you've got a fire in your house and the fire department comes, they want to meet the fire department. And if the water's been shut off, they want to meet somebody from the city. And a lot of times we start to convince ourselves that we're somehow, you know, the bad actor, you know, because we're the ones that shut their water off. You know, that they don't want to see somebody from the city, that the people from the city are going to be problems. What's that old saying? The two biggest lies ever told, well, I guess only one of them is a lie. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. You ever heard that saying? So a lot of people have that attitude about even their local municipalities. And I don't know how we got to be like that, but it's the way it goes. I do a lot of sales coaching these days because I teach presentation skills. And salespeople give a lot of presentations, and a lot of them are commissioned. So the quality of schools that they send their kids to is based on how good that they can do presentations. So they want to get trained. And I spend time with salespeople. And just to show you how much things have changed, I'm probably a little older than you think I am. I'm 62 years old. And I remember back in the day there was a thing called traveling salespeople. Anybody remember the theory that the traveling salesperson would kind of trundle up to the front door, and they're always carrying something? What are they carrying? Yeah, whatever they're selling, right? It's a valise of something. Vacuum cleaners, encyclopedia. God help the encyclopedia salesman. He's got to carry the encyclopedias. Whatever he's selling, he's got to have it with him. And he always came to the same door of the house, the salesperson. It was always a guy back then. I don't know why. But he always came to the same door of the house. What door of the house did he come to? Front door. And he knocked on the front door. And in the early days of traveling salesmen, they not only let the salesman in, they gave him something to eat, something to drink. It was a thing, man. The salesman stayed for 2 hours. Now what happens when somebody knocks on your door? You know, we pretend like we're not home. We're looking out the drapes. Sebastian Maniscalco, you know, the comedian, he does a funny routine about that. That company comes over and everybody hides under the bed, you know. Nobody wants to talk to anybody new. And that's how sales used to be, that you were so glad to have somebody come over. It was a big thing, and it was an afternoon tea. And it's not that way anymore. You know, everything is an interference. We're cocooned, and I think it's even become worse during COVID for various reasons. I don't know if we'll ever come out of it. I hope we do. And then they developed this thing called the Do Not Knock registry, where it became illegal to knock on people's homes or businesses if the Do Not Knock registry was in place. Then the Do Not Call registry. You couldn't, if you were a salesman, you couldn't call somebody to try to sell them something. And the internet comes into play there because you can just go get it on the internet, right? So we started to do this thing where we weren't talking to each other as much as we normally do. We didn't, and because we didn't talk to each other, we didn't get to know each other. And because we didn't get to know each other, we didn't appreciate each other as much. And then it became even harder trying to associate and get things done, you know, the business of the day. How many of you experience this sometimes? Like, you're talking to somebody from the city, and you're like, where's all the attitude coming from? Why do they think I'm the enemy? Anybody ever had that feeling? You're talking to somebody and like, what's going on here? Few? Yeah, maybe more than a few. So I read a good book recently. I see some of you have stuff, pencil and pen to write with. I read a good book recently. It's not a hard read, and it's called Talking to Strangers. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. Anybody a fan of Malcolm Gladwell? Yeah? Which one have you read? Tipping Point, excellent. And which one did you read, sir? Which one? Outliers, yeah, I loved it. And he talked about how that's where the 10,000 hours comes from. You know, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you are an expert. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Thank you for that. So in Talking to Strangers, Gladwell takes apart a bunch of famous scenarios like the Bernie Madoff situation, you know, the biggest Ponzi scheme ever, where he robbed millions and millions of dollars from people by taking in their finances and then using the money for other things. It's essentially what a pyramid scheme is. He also took apart the Sandra Bland case, which was the story, anybody, Sandra Bland? The black lady that gets stopped for a minor traffic infraction in Texas. White cop gets out of the car. You guys probably saw it. The video's on YouTube. It's been viewed millions of times because this cop does everything you could do wrong in a traffic stop. And by the way, the civilian, Sandra Bland, isn't on her best behavior either. And it's not a good ending for Sandra Bland, who gets arrested for this minor infraction. All it had to be was running a stop sign, and it turns into a whole bunch of other stuff. They lock her up, and she commits suicide in jail. And each chapter of this book, Talking to Strangers, Gladwell takes it apart, and he says, it's not so much about what you think is happening here. It's the inability to talk to strangers. It's the inability for us to figure people out in enough time to keep something bad from happening. It's a great read, even if you just buy it to read a couple of the chapters. Another one is Amanda Knox, the lady from the States who was arrested in Italy for a killing. Anybody? A triangle thing, sloppy deal. She went to prison for 7 years, eventually acquitted, right? Why did she go to prison for 7 years? Because we couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure out what was really happening because we weren't paying attention to signals and things that we should be watching. There's a lot of research that none of us are nearly as observant as we think we are. You know, we get convinced that we're really the sharpest knife in the drawer, and we're not. And so when we take extra care, when we practice something called careful communication, see, careful is spelled with one L. But when you spell it with two L's, the communication is full of care, and then you're less likely to leave details aside that can cause you problems later. This is the essence of really good customer service, that you're really paying attention to signals. I imagine law enforcement has to do this a lot when they walk into a home on a domestic violence call and they have to figure shit out in seconds. Who's been drinking? Are there any weapons in the home? I went on a ride-along with an old mate of mine from high school named Dan Frazier. He was a captain. I don't know if he was a captain. He was on the Sheboygan Police Force, small little town. And and I was going up north, and he says, you want to do a ride-along? And I had never had a chance to ride in the front seat of a police car before. And I said, well, sure, let's go. And I said, would you mind if I write an article about it for my blog? He says, why do you think I'm inviting you? He says, that's why we do that kind of thing. Do you do it in Plymouth, ride-alongs? I think is it kind of a community relations thing when you guys do it? Or do you do it for other reasons? Candidates for law enforcement. Yeah. But it's an eye-opening thing, man. If you ever get a chance to go, do not turn down the opportunity. It is eye-opening to be in that squad car and roll up on something and watch people's faces. People who might normally or might under other circumstances be glad to see police. But the expressions that you see, it's just bizarre, man. And so Dan told me we're going to do mostly traffic stops probably. He said if we get any calls, we get them. He said you can't control that. But what we'll do is set up the radar on the side of the road, and we'll stop some people for speeding, and you can at least see what that is about. And I said, great. It'll all be good for me. And I started getting enchanted, not just with the interaction between the police officer and the people he stopped, but the first 15 seconds of that traffic stop. The first 15 seconds. Why? Because a lot of stuff happens in the first 15 seconds. You and I call it a first impression. if we talk about it at all, which we often don't. But the tone and even the resolution is all set up in the first 15 seconds. It's like seeing a movie where they tell you everything you need to know about the ending in the first few minutes. There are movies like this. And then the rest of it just unfolds, you know. So we stop a guy, and I'm in the car, and right away I figure out Dan knows a lot about this car before he even gets out of his vehicle. What do you think? You probably know some of this stuff. What does he know for sure? For sure, when he gets out of the car. Anybody? You guys can't answer. What's he know for sure? Maybe how many people. Certainly he can see heads. He can count the heads. Although on a couple of the stops, he actually knocked on the trunk as he walked to the front of the car. Why do you suppose he did that? Yeah, because you can tell if a trunk is hollow or full by knocking on it. That's what he told me. He also tried the latch one time. You know, it's a dangerous time to be a police officer. And sometimes, you know, you'd like to know what's in the trunk. I'm just telling you what he did that day. I don't know how much of that's your policy here. He also knows who owns the car. True or false? If he can run the tag, he knows who owns the car. Somebody in audiences like this, sometimes people say he knows who's driving the car. No, he does not. And he also does not know what's in the car. So when he approaches, I don't have a chair here to show you, but if you imagine that I'm in a driver's seat right now of a car, the police officer, when he approaches the car in that first 15 seconds, he could stand right here where it's really easy to see him, but he doesn't. Where does he stand? Anybody? Yeah. How'd you know that, sir? We all have. We all have. I remember thinking one time, because I have been inebriated every time I've been stopped, but I remember, why are you standing way back there? And there's a reason for it, you know? Statistically, and I know these guys have been fully trained. I have not. I'm just telling you what he told me that day. This was years ago. Is that statistically speaking, most people are right-handed, overwhelming percentage of the population. And if there is a weapon in the car, a gun, knife, mace, it takes an extra fraction of a second to get the reach all the way over to here, right? And by the way, there's a post in most cars, if it's not a convertible, that can be used for a defense mechanism if the officer needs it. So there's lots of reasons to stand back there. And by the way, when he stops his car, he didn't stop directly behind you parallel like this. He angled, you know, the ass end of the police cars out into the street, you know this, and that's to protect him from oncoming traffic, her from oncoming traffic. So there's all these things in place in the first 15 seconds. And the moral of the story is that in most of our interactions with people, the first 15 seconds is not a matter of life or death. It's certainly not a matter of life and death when people come to City Hall and want to talk to a clerk about something. And yet the first 15 seconds sets the tone for everything that's about to happen. Which is why customer service people are taught to smile and nod their heads and, you know, and do all those things, which is hard to do if you're having your own bad day. So it's interesting to me. Yeah, first impressions, man, so important. So if we know this is true, you know, Chris, I'm not going to invade your space, but I am going to, maybe I'll drop it here. Tony's a little bit further. Just a little guide for me, if you don't mind. Is that all right? Feel safe? So why is it that we're not always our best at first impressions? Why is it that sometimes we don't say hello to people, or we don't smile, or we don't somehow, we get a customer sat survey back, an honest impression from somebody that says, this person really wasn't that nice to me. Well, how did that ever happen? Because you're all good people and you all, you know, want to do a good job. And it's because there's stuff's going on during the day, and the self is an interesting study, if you've ever gotten into it, that we have 50,000 individual thoughts per day. 50,000. And most of them aren't even conscious. They're like they're unconscious. Like when you get up in the morning, Do you put your left sock on first or your right sock on first? Do you even know? I know you don't care. I don't care either. But I'm going to bet you this. I'm going to bet you put the same sock on first every morning. And it's a decision. It's a small little decision, but it's a decision. And when you put the car in reverse to pull out of your parking spot, you look in the rearview mirror. But you don't think to look in the rearview mirror, you just do it, right? And we do a lot of this stuff, and behavioral psychologists call this reflexive. You know, we just do it. We don't really think about it. And that's the way a lot of our habits are. And so when you have these 50,000 thoughts a day, it's kind of important to understand how thoughts determine feelings, and feelings determine behavior. So in your notes, Sue, are you with us? We're going to do some keystroking. And Sue can come on speaker, man. She can do a cameo. Sue, say hello if you're there, please. So in your notes, if you would...
I'm here. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Would you put up Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers? And the book Outliers. Outliers. Oh, we'll worry about spelling later. But Outliers is the 10,000 hours piece. Oh, by the way, the 10,000 hours. So let's do the math. If you work 2,000 hours a year, and that's 50 weeks a year times 40 hours a week, right? That's 2,000 hours. And you do that for 5 years, and you're conscious of your job. You're not just showing up and going through the motions. You are what Malcolm Gladwell and this other more obscure scientist, that's where the actual number came from, says you're an expert because you've logged 10,000 hours. That's 5 years, 2,000 hours a year. And you're an expert at what you do. But if you ask most people, if I had asked you before I gave you that big long explanation, are you an expert at what you do? Are you an expert in your department? You might not have said yes. But according to the numbers, you are. You're an expert. So 10,000 hours equals expert. Sue? And then in your notes, would you do this for me? I need you to write this down because we're going to keep referring to it, and I want you to have a visual of how this works. It's we're going to put 3 components on the screen, Sue. On the left side, let's put thoughts, and then there's an arrow, like you could do that little sideways arrow that points to the middle. There you go. And the middle is emotion. And then on the right side is behavior. And the reason this is important is because of a guy by the name of Albert Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. Sue, if you would, Albert Ellis. He's gone now, dead. But he discovered something called REBT, which stands for Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. There is no quiz on this crap, just telling you where it comes from. So simply put, Albert Ellis said that what we think about likely determines how we feel. What we think about determines how we feel. Think about politics. Think about whether or not you like to wear a mask. Think about your attitude about certain movie stars. We were talking about famous people. Whether or not you like country music. You know, what you think about country music determines how you feel about country music, right? And then Ellis said the natural extension of that is that how you feel determines how you behave. Make sense? It's a pretty simple equation. I don't know if you ever broke it down like that before. But it really puts an accent on thinking, which is why we send kids to school, which is why we worry about kids that haven't been in school for this 2-year period, probably going to be a 2-year period. What happens when kids miss 7th and 8th grade? If they don't think, how will they feel, and then how will they behave when they join the workforce later on? All these things are on the minds of social scientists right now. And so when Ellis talks about this relationship between thoughts, emotion, and behavior, he's a big fan, of course, of getting educated and really understanding life, because when you understand life, you'll feel better about it. And when you feel better about it, you act accordingly, right? And then you make fewer mistakes with your behavior. Think about something as simple as drinking and driving. And Gladwell talks about this in the book Talking to Strangers. He talks about alcohol, how alcohol actually affects the brain. I learned a bunch of stuff about this. You know, you have one drink, and the alcohol is in the front of the brain, you know, the cerebellum. And you might, if you drank too fast because, you know, you deserved this couple long slugs, you haven't seen your mates for a while, and then you stand up, you haven't eaten anything, right? And you stand up and you're a little wobbly, right? That's the first part of alcohol. The second part of alcohol is it starts to move its way back into the brain, into the hippocampus, and then you start to enter, if you have enough to drink, you enter a blackout stage. I mean, so there's like this progression the more you drink. But if you don't understand this, and because you didn't think about it, he's like, well, I can just have another drink. You know, I feel like having another cocktail, right? And then I spent a lot of time in bars growing up. I watched more people finish their drinks. Why? So they could get in the car and drive home. Bizarre. Who in their right mind would do this? Slam down a drink because we don't want to waste it so we can get in the car and drive home. And that's exactly what we do. And then you meet these guys. Thoughts determine emotion. Emotion determines behavior. That's just one example. My favorite book of all time, I do a lot of reading, is called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, A-R-I-E-L-Y. And if you like this psychology stuff and how life really works, you'll love this book. The premise of the book is this, that as smart as we are, as smart as you are, and you are, and you are, and you are, we not only make mistakes that aren't in our best, we do stuff that's not in our best interest, we do it in a pattern. We do it over and over again. Where somebody from outer space would just look at this and say, what's the matter with these people? You know, why do they do that? But it's just how habits work. And it's all based in this relationship between thoughts and emotion and behavior. So here's where it really gets messed up. That's where it really gets interesting. Is that because we have this system for processing thoughts, right, and how it plays out in our emotion and our behavior, two interesting things start to happen. The first thing is we see stuff, we think we see stuff that's not really there. We think we see stuff that's not really there. I'll give you some examples. Lottery ticket. You know, you think you're going to win, but statistically speaking, you're not going to win at all. And if you do, it'll just be a couple of dollars, right? It's like they say in Vegas, the house always wins. So you think you see the big prize, but the prize isn't there at all. You think you see it, but it's not really there. Second example, you're at a counter for customer service and you think you're getting shabby treatment, or you're on a help desk on a phone with somebody and you're getting not treated well. You think you're being slighted, but you're not being slighted at all. You've imagined it, and now you're going to write them up. You know, you're going to complain, right? And they were just doing their best. So we see stuff that's not there. And here's the second thing that happens. We don't see stuff that is there. That's back to us being not as observant as we think we are. And I'll give you some examples of that as well. Bad habits. We have, all of us, me included, we have habits that don't serve us. But I think I'm okay with it. Eating late at night, and then I don't sleep well. Why do I do that to myself? I just do. I know better. I can't stop. I'm watching a movie with a redhead, and I eat too much popcorn or whatever, and then I'm in bed and I'm like, why did I do that? So bad habits is one example. A second example is when you're misled. Like somebody tells you something, and you really admire this person, and you go, well, yeah, if he said it, it must be true. So you're seeing something that's not there. It's not true. And that happens all the time. And it's fascinating. And it doesn't matter how old you are, 22, 52, 82, we all fall for this, all of us. So part of the problem is we don't really know ourselves. We don't really know who we are. Sue, we're going to do another little graphic here. So on the screen, we're going to create, and it's going to be hard for you to do in Word, but we want to create 4 quadrants. Maybe you do it without the lines. And in the upper left quadrant, you guys can write it all down too. So you do a horizontal line like this, and you do a vertical line over it like this. So 4 quadrants. And in the quadrants, I'm going to ask you to write a word in each quadrant. In the upper left quadrant, you're going to write the word relator. You have to write this down because I'm going to refer to it for a minute, if you don't mind. Relator. In the upper right quadrant, the word socializer. In the lower left quadrant, Sue, thinker. You're doing great. Can you see in the back of the room? You need it bigger? We can do it. And in the lower right quadrant, the word director. And this is a very simple personality assessment that, and there's many, but this is a simple one. Only got 4. And so what the social scientists say is that if you really know who you are and your place in the world, it's helpful as you start to deal with the other 3 personalities. But most people don't really understand where they are on the spectrum. I'll help you with this right now. So if you're a relator on the left side, each of the styles has a plus and a minus. If you're a relator, the plus for the relator, Sue, is that you are a people person or a bridge builder. You know, you get along with people easily. And you'll start to see yourself in one of these personalities as I described. The downside to being a relator in the upper left corner is that you're not good with conflict. And that makes sense. You know, you want to make people happy. You're not there to cause problems, right? And so you're not good with conflict. So if you put, Sue, a plus next to people person and a minus sign next to not good with conflict, you'll see very quickly the plus and the minus for each of these personalities. And then if we move over to the right side where we had the socializer, the socializer likes to have fun. So that's the plus. They'll do anything to have fun and enjoy themselves, even at work. The downside to socializers is it's hard to take them seriously because they're always playing the clown. Everything's funny to these people. Everything's amusing, right? Doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just how they are. By the way, I'm a socializer. And the lower left corner, the thinker, the positive for the thinker is if you have a thinker on your team or a thinker in your family, they're great people to have around because they absolutely make the best decisions of everybody. They have a high threshold for analytical processing. They can't get enough data. They're very patient. They're not emotional about decisions. They just want their best decision. And they spend a lot of time on it. Good guy to have around. Good lady. The downside is thinkers take a long time to make up their mind. Some of you are seeing yourself in these personalities right now. That's good. We're going to take a little poll here in a minute. And then finally, in the lower right corner, the director. And the plus for the director is that the director loves 2 things more than anything else: efficiency and productivity. So you can imagine the city of Plymouth loves directors. See, we want you to have fun at work, but we don't really pay you for that. We pay you to be efficient and productive. So American business covets this person. But this person has its own Achilles heel as well. The negative side about being a director is that you achieve those 2 things, efficiency and productivity, at the expense of your greatest resource, which is what? Anybody. People. Exactly right. So you're really efficient and productive, but the people on your team sometimes think you're cold, or you're not a people person, or you're rude. You're not rude at all. You're just trying to get things done, right? So you know enough about each of these personalities now, you probably know which one you identify with. So let's have a quick poll. There is no wrong answer. We're going to see all 4 styles in the room. Answer as if you're at work, not at home, because some of you may feel like you're more than one personality. Some of you may feel that you have multiple personalities. Answer as if you're at work. Thank you, Nick. How many of you think you might be a relator, a people person? Hands up. Cool. Excellent. How many of you think you might be a socializer? Fun is your thing. You like to enjoy yourself. Good. Me too. That's where I'm at. And it makes sense, right? I came up through music. Now I'm a professional speaker, right? I like people. How many think you might be a thinker? Hands up. Cool, cool. And then finally, how many of you think you might be a director? Excellent. How many of you didn't raise your hand? A couple of you, that's all right. So like I said, there is no wrong answer, but a big start to just figuring out life and figuring out people, customer service, working with people, teams. If you ever scratch your head, I don't know where he's coming from, is this model right here. I was 26 years old before I saw this. I've been teaching it ever since. And I got this from a guy by the name of Tony Alessandra with 2 S's. Tony Alessandra. Now, this is really useful, especially after you start to identify with one of the personalities, because then you have to identify the people you're talking to. This is where it really gets cool. So it turns out that when you're working with these different people, that you can have a better show with them if you think about who they are as a person. If you, instead of just coming in and rolling the same way with everybody, that you would treat that person a certain way. Let's talk about that for a second. You're going to go into a meeting with a relator. What should you talk about for the first, it's a 1-hour meeting. What should you talk about for the first 40 minutes if you're smart? Did I hear family? Friends? For 40 minutes. And then you spend the rest of the 20 minutes on what it is that you want to talk about. And that person will do everything you ask them to do because you paid homage to them. You paid tribute to their friends and family. If you were at their desk and they had photos of their dog, you're saying, what's your dog's name? Tell me about your kids. What's going on? That's a beautiful home. Is that your cottage? Wow. You know, and you spend time on it. And then these people that wanted to please you anyway feel like you respect them and they'll do whatever you want them to do. It's a very simple formula. You're going to go into a 1-hour meeting with the thinker. What should you take with you? I know some of you have to bop in and out. That's cool. What should you take with you in the meeting with the thinker? Remember what the thinker likes. Data, information. And never try to outsmart the thinker. They're smarter than you. That's why they're a thinker, right? And don't bring them trivia, you know? Pay homage to the fact that they're smart. It's good. It's fine. It's all right. It's just, and it's who they think they are as a person, right? You're going to go into a 1-hour meeting with a socializer. Where will the meeting take place? In a bar. It's exactly right. Or a restaurant. And who should decide which restaurant? You or the socializer? Socializer. And you say, where would you like to go? And right away they'll tell you, I like to go to such and such. And when you get there and you talk to the receptionist, she's going to want to take you to a table. And you let the socializer choose the table because they have a favorite table. And then don't sit down before the socializer. Let the socializer sit down first because they're always going to sit in the same chair. Which chair is that? That's right, the chair with the back to the wall. Because they like to see and be seen. That's why they're a socializer. So you can give them these little concessions and then the meeting's going to go better. If you take their chair, watch out. My brother Joe and I are socializers, both of us. And when we go to lunch, it's a foot race to see who can get to the table first. because we both want that same chair. Is that one of you guys? Fire? What is it? Oh, private, yeah. Don't you guys get called for that, no? Ah, okay. Yeah. You're going to go into a 1-hour meeting with the director. You can forget about it. It's not going to be an hour. It's going to be 6 minutes because he's interested in efficiency and productivity. She. And where will that meeting take place? Anybody? Yeah. Their office, your office, the parking lot, in the rain, in the bathroom, doesn't matter because they're going to get that productivity from you. So on Monday morning, when you're in the parking lot coming in at 8 o'clock and your eyes are still popping open from the second cup of coffee, and the director says, do you have that report that you're supposed to have for me today? It's not that he didn't care how your weekend was. It's just that he cares about the report more. He's not being rude. It's just who he is. Or she. And when you start to understand it like this, you stop holding people accountable just because they're not like you. Because guess what? According to this chart, 75% of the people in the world are not like you at all. And so when we talk about conflict resolution and dealing with difficult people, we always think it's the other person that's being difficult. But that's not how it is either. So we all grew up with a thought that was planted in our brains in church and school, and it's called the Golden Rule. Somebody can shout it out for me? What is it? You know it. Yeah. The Bible version is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but it's the same thing. Treat others as you would want to be treated. And on the face of it, it sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Sounds great. Part of the reason it sounds great is because you've been hearing it your whole life. But it doesn't make any sense at all. If 75% of the population is different than you, what makes you think everybody wants to be treated like you? So I'm a socializer, and 3/4 of this room is not a socializer. Why do I think everybody in here wants to party and hang crepe paper and sing Kumbaya and do all the things that, I don't know, socializers are known for, right? That'd be a bad mistake. So what Tony Alessandra did is he flipped the golden rule. He calls it the platinum rule. And Tony Alessandra says that you should do unto others as they want to be done unto. Treat people the way they want to be treated. And that, when I learned this, I just felt like I finally was starting to understand people. I was scratching my head all the time. Why are they like that? Why are they like that? And I use it to this day. I used it 3 times this morning already because I realized the person was not like me. They wanted my communication to come a certain way. I might want to talk about something for 5 minutes. They only want to talk about it for 1 minute. I want to stand up. They want to sit down. It's over and over and over again as the day goes on. And to the extent that I can accommodate other people, I become more useful to them. And my day has a lot less friction. Does this make sense? Hands up if it seems reasonable to you. Some of this stuff seems reasonable. Yeah, okay. And if you have concerns about it, let me know. I'm interested. Yeah, go ahead, please. That's a great question. So one of the things we put in place in workplaces for efficiency is a protocol and procedure and a handbook. And the easiest example of this is auto mechanics have a thing called the Well, I think it was called the Chiltons at one point. What is the thing now that tells you how long it takes to replace a water pump? Do they? I don't know if the cars even have water pumps anymore. But if you're going to replace a fuel filter on a car, there's a book that says it's supposed to take you 20 minutes. It's a standard. And hopefully the city has a standard for stuff like, outbound calls, balancing the end of the month books, stuff like that. And so even if the person's not that interested in efficiency and productivity, the job description says you're supposed to be able to get it done in X amount of time. So we hold that standard to them. And if they can't handle it, that's fine. We move them along to another job, or they move themselves along, that kind of a thing. Does that partly answer your question? So standards are really important. And then what you can do is you can move the meeting around to accommodate the other person. You find a way that you can make it work because you have that much awareness now of who you're actually talking to. For example, one of these personalities is the easiest for you to work with. You know which one? Go ahead. That's right. It's the one that's like you. Because there's that much less work to do, right? So when I meet another socializer, it's time, it's party time. We understand each other. When I meet another musician, I get them. They get me. It works great. I can often tell they're a musician before they tell me they're a musician or a creative type, I don't know how that is. I imagine athletes feel the same way about each other. People who like to read, you just pick that up about people. And conversely, there is somebody in this chart who is your kryptonite. The really hardest person for you to work with. And who is that? It's the person, maybe this is what you're saying, it's the person that's diametrically opposed to you on the chart. So the director has the hardest time with relators. Remember I told you the relator wants to talk to you about their dog and their pets and stuff? And the director didn't even know you had a dog. Doesn't care that you have a dog, But the relator wants you to ask about the dog. That's why the picture's up at the desk. And the relator thinks the director is too much about business all the time. They struggle with that. Why can't we be friends? And the director's like, I don't want to be your friend. I'm your boss. Works the same way with the thinker and the socializer. The socializer loves to have fun, loves to be with people. Thinking is an independent activity. In fact, I heard somebody say one time that if you're above this line, that line that's the horizontal line, if you're above it, you're a people person. And if you're below it, you're not a people person. Directors don't need people except the boss around. Thinkers don't need people at all. It's an independent activity. But socializers have to have people by definition. I do. COVID's been really hard on my psyche because I miss my peeps. And relators need people because how else can you build bridges if you don't have anybody to build bridges to? So I love this, and I wanted to share it with you today as part of our conversation because it helps you understand the whole picture, not that people aren't like you. Very few people are like you, and that if we're going to have any kind of commonality, people have to come together, have to understand each other, and this is a good way to understand each other. So this leads into a concept called empathy, which I wanted to, I already told you we're going to talk about today. And empathy sometimes gets confused for sympathy. Does anybody know the difference between sympathy and empathy? Because one of them's really useful and the other one not so much. That's right. That's right. So if I have sympathy for you, I feel sorry for you. And that has all kinds of connotations that I may not want to get involved with. Like I'm better than you, or I pity you. Those aren't particularly useful things to say to people, especially if they're going to take it wrong. But empathy is a much different approach. Empathy says, I understand how you feel. and I feel for you, and I'm going to help you fix this because I feel for you, because I've been there, right? It's a much different emotion. And when you can convey the difference between sympathy and empathy, the relationship improves almost instantly. You know, I've been, just give you some examples. I've been poor. I've been overweight. I've been bullied. I've been in trouble with the law, you know, and here's how I got out of it. Here's how I set myself on a good path. And you can too. You see how all of a sudden the relationship starts to look better because you're using empathy instead of sympathy. But here is the really big thing. We've seen this come out in COVID when you think everybody would be compassionate, not just because there's a pandemic all over the world, where you think everybody would just start treating each other better. Like, can you think back to 9/11 and how we treated each other for a few days after 9/11 when you thought the country was under siege and you might never see your loved ones again and this might be World War III and all those things are going through your head? Remember those dark days? And you started thinking, you know, I'm going to be a better person and I'm going to start paying attention more to the terrorists, you know, and I'm going to, this is going to be a seminal moment for us, a flashpoint. We're going to be better people from now on. And how long did that last? A week? You know? So we thought when the pandemic happened, well, we're all going to get to that place again. But it didn't work quite like that, at least in the States. We actually we had more animosity. And in some ways became more divided and more rancor. And part of it was because there was a lot of confusion. Nobody had been through a pandemic before. But I think when it comes to empathy, this feeling like let's just use masks as an example. I think this has subsided quite a bit the deeper we've gotten into the pandemic, but some people still feel this way, that if I don't want to wear a mask, I'm justified in bullying you for wanting to wear one. We've seen examples of this, right? Whereas I could have had empathy and said, well, if you want to wear a mask, it's okay with me. I'd rather not wear one, but you can wear one if you want. Well, we didn't see that at all. We saw like this, you know, why aren't you like me? And maybe it was because people were scared or we didn't really know what was happening. But we weren't practicing empathy. Not much. And it caused a lot of problem. It caused a lot of pain. It caused pain within families who couldn't talk to each other at the dinner table. It's just one example. It's a current example. So here's the question. When you have empathy, when you practice empathy, we all agree that empathy is a good trait to have? Yeah? Does anybody think empathy is useless and something that you shouldn't trouble yourself with? Okay. So we all think empathy is a good idea. Would you also agree that it's a good idea to have empathy for everybody? Or do you think empathy should be selective? Selective? Okay, interesting. And how do you decide who you're going to be empathic with? Okay, situational. If you've never been through it, I agree. You can't say yeah. Like my brother's home flooded in Louisiana. I've never been a victim of a flood. So for me to say to my brother, I know what it's like to have your home flooded, it would have been a lie. But I can get there with him in other ways. You know, I can say, I feel really bad for you. I actually flew down and helped him gut out his house. You know, you ever have to pull out the insulation from inside the walls? You cut the drywall, 24 inches above the ground, and you have to eviscerate the whole house. You could go down like this and see through the whole house because there's no walls there anymore. You can never get the moisture out. It's a mess. Whew. And we did it in the Louisiana heat in August. So yeah, I couldn't say that to my brother. I know what it's like to be flooded. No. And by the way, to your point, situational. If you're hanging around with a really bad person like a sociopath, right? You wouldn't necessarily feel empathy for a sociopath or a mass murderer, you know, really, really bad people. So I do agree that there are situations where you're just not going to be able to go there. But here's an interesting question. Most of us have empathy for a 2-year-old and a 92-year-old, but sometimes we'll struggle with the 32-year-old. Because the 32-year-old should know better, you know? And I make a case for you today that you should be empathic with the 32-year-old. We could do a lot better with empathy, ladies and gentlemen, all of us. And on the day we figure this out, the world is a better place. But there's problems. I mean, there's violence in the world, and there's pain. And when you walk into one of those situations, empathy is not your default. First thing is safety and fear and all these other emotions, right? But if you can get to empathy, man, it's a beautiful place to be. I know Paul Sincock through an organization called Rotary. I think that's how we know each other. And in Rotary, in life, there are things called heuristics. You don't have to worry about the spelling or anything. It's a shortcut. So a shortcut helps us understand these complicated things, right? And in Rotary, we have a thing called the Four-Way Test, which is a heuristic. It's a shortcut for understanding what it means to be a good Rotarian. And we'll have Sue type the Four-Way Test quickly. Paul may have explained this to you. And I guess the Rotary Club meets here, the Rotary Club of Plymouth. First is it the truth? You know, that's what Rotarians value, the truth. Is it the truth, or is it gossip, for example? And we don't trouble ourselves with gossip, which saves a shitload of time. The second one, is it fair to all concerned? So as a Rotarian, I would never do anything that wasn't fair to you, even if I made out like a bandit. That's not who I am as a person. Want to help me finish the four-way test? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? So I won't do anything with you that doesn't build goodwill or better friendships. It's not in my best interest. And the fourth is it beneficial to all concerned? And every Rotarian knows this four-way test. It's a beautiful thing. So one of the cool things I like about Rotary is it's above, a lot of times religion messes with people's heads and politics messes with people's heads. Even gender now is an issue with a lot of people. Gender and these like societal things that are becoming problematic. People don't understand them. They're too complicated, whatever. Rotary's above all of it. Rotarian says, I don't care about your politics. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what gender you are. I don't care if you're an L, a G, a B, Q, LGBTQ. I don't care about any of them. I just treat you as a good person. It's kind of nice. I mean, it just cleans everything up. Another heuristic that's very useful, but society's gotten away from it, and maybe you guys can tell me more about this, because I've owned my own business for a long time. I don't work on a big team like this for a city, but it seems to me that compliments are slipping away from us. We don't compliment each other like we used to. Just think about the gender problems. There used to be compliments, and a man could compliment a woman, and nobody thought too much about it. But now it's complicated, If it's what we call a physical compliment, you're in the danger zone already. You're not supposed to do that anymore. And a lot of older guys are having trouble forgetting that habit. So there are two types of compliments, and I call them inside compliments, Sue, and outside compliments. And outside compliments are those kind that we're just talking about. The outside compliment is I see it, and then I say it, right? So I like your haircut. That color looks good on you. Did you get new shoes? And women are really good with these compliments. Women are good at complimenting each other, but men not so much. It's not our thing, And because women, I don't know, they just cultivated that skill in general better than men. I just admit it. I think it's true. We could learn a lot from ladies in that regard. So this idea of outside compliments versus inside compliments, right? The outside compliments are easy. I see it, I say it. But the inside compliments are things you cannot see about the other person. Like what? Yeah, or character trait, like you're helpful. I didn't see it. I could have seen it if you helped me. I think you're a helpful person. I want to tell you you're helpful. Good. What else? There's a dozen, 15 of them. Energy, right? I like your style. Somebody told me when I got started in the business, they say, I like your style. I'm like, oh my God, that meant so much to me early on. You know, he likes my style. That's pretty cool. I like your attitude. You seem like an honest person. Integrity, right? Principles. You can't see those. And when you say that to somebody, it really leaves a mark. It helps them feel good about themselves. And then by proxy, they feel good about you. But I think we're getting away from compliments. Quick poll. How many of you think, I'll give you two choices, as a society, we're as good at compliments as we ever were? And how many think we might be slipping from it for various reasons? Anybody? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's probably true. And again, it's one of those things that keeps us from being better to each other. So here you are at a training today, and we're going to do some Q&A in a minute, and then I think Paul's got a nice surprise for you. We're doing a training here today where we stopped everything for you. Come in, think about this. Come in and listen and see if we can give you some ideas that might help you, right? And one of those ideas is you could impact the corporate culture of the city of Plymouth by complimenting each other more or learning to be better with compliments. And I say that without knowing where you are on the compliment scale. Maybe you do it really well all the time. But could you be better at it? And if you found that it improved relationships with people you work with 2,000 hours a year, would you then go home and compliment your teenager more often because you live with him all year? And how would the teenager feel about himself when you did that? It's an interesting name, self-esteem. Self-esteem is this idea that you get it from yourself, for yourself, self-esteem. But self-esteem can come from other people. It can come from total strangers. Maybe I'm helping you feel better about your situation today. I'm helping you with your self-esteem. We've never met before. And on the way home, I'll listen to a podcast of somebody that I've never met. And they'll whisper something in my ear about something. And I go, wow, I've never thought of that before. That makes me feel good. I'll bet he's right. And that's how it works. It's interesting. Quick story. How many of you are parents, little ones? Yeah, or maybe they're grown now, yeah. How old? I know it changes every year. Oh, wow. The wonder years. Anybody got young ones? 5, 6, 4, how old? Fantastic. Who else? Yeah, how old, sir? 14, okay. In the back? 7 and 2, okay, wow. Do they get along, the 7 and 2-year-old? Yeah. I don't have children, but I have a favorite story of growing up when I was 6 years old. My father called me into the room, and he said to me, Michael, it was like, one of those test questions that parents sometimes ask just to check your thinking. I was 6. And he goes, Michael, who is the most important person in the whole world? That's a big question for a 6-year-old. And I thought about it for a second, and then I answered with the answer that I thought my dad would want to hear. I said, you are, Daddy. And my dad smiled, and he nodded his head yes, and he said, okay, I'm going to ask you again in another couple seconds, Michael. Think about it really hard this time. Who is the most important person in the whole world? And I thought, even as a 6-year-old, I thought, well, I must not have gotten it right the first time, Oh, I know who it is. And I answered quickly. I said, it's Mommy. And he said, okay. And then I realized that it's still not right. He says, I'm going to ask you one more time. Think hard, son. Who is the most important person in the whole world? And I looked up my father, and I had that 6-year-old moment, and I said, I am, Daddy. And he said, that's right, son, that's right. It took me 3 chances, but I got it. And on that day, I started thinking of myself differently. What happens when I owe that kind of self-respect to myself? That kind of respect to myself. And I grew up learning that I'm not more important than anybody else. I'm as important. And that's, I guess, what allowed me to walk into a room and interrupt conversations with movie stars and say, can I have a photo with you? You've made me so happy watching your movies. I don't hesitate. And that's what has me reading all these books and figuring this stuff out so I can share it with nice people like you. I find this to be a very valuable experience, a very valuable use of my time today. And I'm so glad we could work it out. We tried several times. We had to move this meeting twice. You probably know that. And we had the choice of, virtual or not doing it and all these choices. And I'm glad we got together today. I have a goodbye story before we go, but I thought maybe you'd have some questions about anything that we talked about, or maybe something that we haven't talked about. And I know we have people watching on the camera. They're invited to get a message to Sue or text a message to Paul and answer that too. Thoughts? Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. 100%. And my situational friend walked out, Dave, you tell him when he comes back, that it's true. It's a situational thing for sure, but there are patterns to it. If you can figure out life's patterns, life becomes a lot easier. Like these guys have patterns, on calls and stuff. And we talked about domestic violence calls a minute ago. How often is alcohol involved in a domestic call? What percentage? 75? Yeah. So it's like a pattern, you can almost guess that somebody's been drinking. I heard a great statistic, it's a terrible statistic, that if you're going to be murdered in the United States, you are much more likely to be murdered by somebody who's been drinking than not drinking. And if you really want to be murdered, the other person's drinking and you're drinking too. And once you figure out these patterns, man, you could start figuring, you could expand your lifespan, because the patterns hold true. The situational part. What's your first name, sir? John. Okay. So back, Sue, if we could go back to the chart with the 4 quadrants. I gave you the short version, John. We can talk more about this if you want, but the idea was that you had that vertical line up and down this way, and then you had the horizontal line this way, that you could actually plot your points on this continuum, right? Because it's a little bit too much to go into at this point in the program, but you could be on the extreme part of the quadrant, or you could be toward the middle. Think about crosshairs like on a target. And the idea would be, John, that you're better to be in the middle, because then you could move to the various parts of the diagram. So it's better to be a thinker who can relate, a thinker who can socialize, and a thinker who can direct. It's adaptability that's the key to success. Thank you for that question. I'm glad to clear that up, because you don't like stand in your quadrant and go, this is me, deal with it. You adapt to the other people. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but that maybe underscores it for you. And the second part, and I get this question a lot, You could be a director at work and a relator at home, right, Mommy? Absolutely. And I used to be a director because I was an angry young man. I thought I had all the answers. I had a lot of energy, and I thought just the energy and my intellect is going to carry the day. And I realized over time that that's not how it works at all. And now I realize I'm much more happy in the socializer. I just like to entertain people and get them thinking. And I love traveling, and I love helping people. And that's a good thing for a good place for a socializer to be. Other thoughts, questions? I'm particularly interested in the city of Plymouth and struggles that you're having and with your teams and your departments, and maybe the people, the lovely people of Plymouth giving you a hard time. Nothing you want to talk about? Mr. Sincock. With who? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the question from the audience is about neighbor wars. People in the neighborhood who aren't getting on with their neighbors, and it's causing a lot of problems, and the city eventually has to get involved because if you have a problem with your neighbor and you can't fix it, you call the city, and now the city's got to wear black and white every day to referee. And so there's a thing in the landlord business, like if you live in a multi-unit dwelling, that the landlord never wants to get involved in the scuffle between the neighbors. He's always going to encourage the neighbors to work it out themselves. And the same thing's true in the Rotary clubs, because sometimes there's factions within the club that aren't doing well, and they try to find Rotary big shots in Evanston, Illinois to solve the problem for them. And Evanston says, that's not our thing, man. So two things, one internal and one external. The internal bit of advice comes from another consultant by the name of Ken Blanchard, and he wrote some time ago a book called The 1 Minute Manager. Probably a still good read if you're into management. And Blanchard said there's a saying, and it comes from that saying about the monkey on my back. The saying is, it's not my monkey, right? So if you call me, working for the City of Plymouth, about a scuffle you're having with your neighbor, my internal voice says, it's not my monkey. But I could never say that into the telephone. You know, that's not what we teach you. But that's absolutely 100% true. It's not your problem at the City of Plymouth that the two neighbors aren't getting along. The external voice, which is the one we train you on, I think, and if I told you earlier, I'm not creating policy, I'm just telling you what most companies do, most organizations, is that you encourage, you tell that person it's not as bad as you think it is. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. My gosh, if you guys just talked over the fence, you could probably iron this out. Have you tried talking to the other person? By the way, what's the answer to that question most of the time? No. They call the city to fix it. They haven't even walked their lazy butt over to the other house to talk to them about it yet, right? Because that's the essence of complaining. And you read about this in Gary Zukav's book, The Seat of the Soul. Gary Zukav says a complainer is trying to get you to solve their problem. When I read that, I fell out of my chair. So that's how that works. The complainer is trying to get you to solve their problem. And the answer is, it's not my monkey. I mean, you could go empathic and say, well, here's how other people have solved it. But you don't want to start solving their problems for them, because that's not what the City of Plymouth is supposed to be doing. Does that help, Paul? Yeah. You probably knew the answer. Yes, sir. Yeah, second question. or if there's just been a scene, an incident. Yeah. So the question is, yeah, paraphrasing here, is about image and how people make up their minds that a uni represents something, and so when the uni shows up, even though the incident that's on their mind happened in Southern California, they're going to impose it upon the local uni here, and it doesn't matter if it's a police uniform or a public works, or municipal services uniform. Doesn't matter. People just transfer this stuff like crazy. And here's the thing: if you're working with people, like, you can never get tired of trying to prove yourself to other people. Every day, that's what it's about. I wish it wasn't so, but it's true. Look, what is the one thing that you have complete control over in life? What's that? Yeah, your stuff. Your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. Those are the only three things in the world you can control. You can't control what other people think. You can't control how other people feel. And you certainly don't control how other people behave. And if they call you with some sort of predisposed feeling about what you do for a living, your job is to convince them that you're above standard. And if you listen to the stuff I was telling you today, you can change their minds in the first 15 seconds. If you say the right thing, if you do the right thing. Not always, but most of the time. One second, John. I always tell people, because I work with HR a lot, and HR resents me because HR, they get initials after their name and they work really hard. Do we have HR people in the room today? And here I am, I come in like a cowpoke. I come in from out of town and I saddle up, I tie my horse outside, and I come in here and I do my thing, and HR goes, I could do that. They don't, but they say I could do that. And so, not all of them, but some of them. And I have to prove myself all the time to HR. I have to make friends with them every time I come in. Listen, I didn't come to steal your job. I didn't come here to change. I didn't come here to compare myself to you. You guys do stuff I could never do. And then they feel better after I say it. But I have to say it every single time to help them feel better. It's okay. John, follow up? Yeah. 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 What do you do here, John? What is your title? Community Development Director. Yeah. And I'm not cutting you off. I want to just get it on the recording. So John's talking about, all this is well and good, Mr. Big Shot Speaker. Everything you say makes sense, but we're tired too, and we're human. We make mistakes and we have emotions, and when people trigger us, we send those emails that haven't been waiting in the email box long enough for us to wordsmith it and change the tone a little bit. We could get in trouble ourselves. Please finish. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Well, this is their argument is based. I think, no disrespect, John was digging a little bit deeper into the scenario. Everybody that's listening, that that they expect us to solve their problems, that they pay their taxes, and there was a positioning. It's based on what's called a false premise, John, and you know this. That just because they pay taxes doesn't mean you're supposed to go over there and referee. That's not how it works at all. But then you have to pretend like you're hearing this for the first time from them, and then you have to pretend like you're interested in the snow argument between the two rich people, and then you have to you have to listen. So that's a big part of this relationship thing. You have to log the time. Same thing when these guys show up and somebody's bleeding from an open wound, you have to listen to what they have to say, even though you know somebody's going to go to the hospital. So you get the story out, and then you say, well, maybe this would help, and you offer a couple of 3 suggestions. But that's essentially what you're doing, John, is, and you know this, is you're handing the monkey right back to them. You're not solving the problem for them. And if you're a relator or a people person, you want to solve the problem for them, but that's not the model. You have to take a pass on it. And then you say, you start to work toward the end of the dialogue, which is, and there's scripts for all this stuff. You guys know this. And at the end, the lines are, well, I really appreciate you calling because it's always nice to know what's going on in the community. And I hope what we've talked about today has been helpful for you. And I'd like to hear from you again sometime with a success story that this worked. Will you promise to keep in touch with me? And every fiber of your being is like, don't ever call me again. But what do you say? I'm wishing you the best, and I'd like to hear from you that things have worked out. Will you keep in touch? And what's the overall message? I care. Which is all they wanted to know in the first place. They didn't really expect the total stranger was going to roll up and solve a 20-year Hatfield and McCoy's argument between 2 neighbors. That's not what they thought was going to happen. I want to close with 2 quick stories. The first one I didn't know I was going to tell you until this morning when I got up and saw the news. And then the other one I close with all the time because it makes me feel good. I get good feedback on the story. It's a nice up way to end it. But I'm going to take you down for a minute. 46% of all households watch the Super Bowl. Hands up if you did. Yeah, about 46%. And your favorite commercial? Anybody see the Jeep commercial with Bruce Springsteen? I missed it. I don't know what part of the game it was in. I watched most of the. Was the second half? Yeah, that's why I missed it. So it's a 2-minute deal, and it's lovely. You can actually Google up the script and the way Bruce delivers it. You know, Bruce has a certain image, and you go to him for folksy truth and practical. You know, and I'm not a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but I saw this commercial. I had to see it after the game. I saw this commercial, and I thought, man, it made me feel like going to Alaska or going to Mount Rushmore. It made me feel good about myself. It made me feel good about my country, my rich neighbors that fight over snow. You'll have to see the commercial. I won't spend any more time on it. It's just really good. And I read this morning that Bruce Springsteen was arrested for a DUI in November. And I know that he had a book that came out about how he was abused by his father, and he had issues growing up, and he suffered from depression recently. And I thought to myself, here's a guy, you think he's in charge. He's got everything that you could ever want in the world. and he made it, you know, and he doesn't have any problems. And he got more problems than you do if you don't have a DUI. And it just goes to show you, man, we all have it. We're all celebrities. We're all important. We all have the ability to lead a good, safe, fun life, you know, and not fall into despair. And are there tricks, John? Yeah, there are tricks for getting through the pandemic. Bright colors, certain smells. Watch comedy at night instead of murders on television. I don't know what works for you. That works for me. I don't like to watch violence before I go to bed. Some people dig it. But you got to find your formula, because we're starting to see some light at the end of this tunnel, but we don't exactly know how long the tunnel is yet. That's been the problem for a lot of the restaurateurs who are also ringing the city phones. We want to open up, and we don't want to close again, Governor Whitmer, you know. But we don't have control over that. Trying to ride this thing out, make the best of it. And I heard that about Bruce, and I thought, there's a lesson there for all of us, you know, that we all have problems, we're all struggling, we're all going to get through this. It's just going to work out. And nobody's better off than you. Because when you compare yourself to other people, that's when you start feeling less than. So you're no better, Bruce Springsteen's no better off than you are. The final little story I want to give you today is 2 minutes. And it's something that happened to me. I was getting on an airplane once in Detroit to fly out to do a speaking gig. And it was the same nonsense that you usually see when you get on a plane, people struggling to get their bags on and trundling, you know, slow motion, all this kind of stuff. It's very inefficient, unproductive way to go about the morning, getting on an airplane. And the pilot came on this particular day. He made a very unusual announcement. I never heard a pilot say this before. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome you to flight such and such." He says, "Listen, you probably know there's rough weather coming into Detroit, and we'd like to get you all seated and buckled up so that we can leave early." And I fly a ton. I've got 1 million miles just on Delta. And I never heard a pilot say this before. I didn't know a plane could leave early. Did you? If everybody's on the plane can leave. And I'm like, well, that's an aha for me. And it worked like a charm all of a sudden, because nobody wants to miss their connection. Everybody's hustling it up, you know. It's like he whispered something magical in everybody's ears. Everybody sits down, they buckle up, we're ready to go. It's 7 minutes before takeoff, and the pilot says, "We're going to close the doors. Thank you very much." I don't know why they don't do this on every flight. And then he said a second announcement that was very unusual. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, because of this rough weather, we are going to ask the flight attendants to remain seated on our short flight to Chicago," flying into the storm. "And we're suspending the beverage service. And you'll notice it's getting very dark outside, and visibility is very, very low. Fortunately, we are going to fly with instrument rating up here in the cockpit. It is safe. Even though you can't see 10 feet out the window, it is safe for us to fly." And everybody just gets a little bit more nervous, you know, because they look outside the window, they can't see nothing. And he said, "Oh, and by the way, it's going to be a very violent takeoff because of all that heavy air that's coming in. So please don't be alarmed. Hang in there. We're going to get you to Chicago safely." Well, he was right, man. It was a herky-jerky, rock and roll takeoff. Most violent flight I've ever been on. People were reaching for their airsick bags, all kinds of stuff happening. But something interesting happened, ladies and gentlemen. We started to gain altitude, of course, and the higher we climbed into bright, pristine sunshine, because why? The sun is out every day, isn't it? Even on cloudy, overcast day, the sun is out. And all you need to decide as a person, as a citizen of Plymouth, as a department at the City of Plymouth, as a city services team, all you need to decide is whether you want to fly your plane in the clouds or above them. You can do that as an individual first, and you do it as a team later, and that's when the corporate culture shifts. I hope the information today has been helpful. I hope you've been loosely entertained by some of these crazy anecdotes about Hal Holbrook and Bruce Springsteen. My website is michaelangelocaruso.com. I have a YouTube channel with nearly 1,000 videos on it, 2-minute messages coming at you. If you're wondering how you're going to get through the tunnel and you want to play one of those videos in the morning, or subscribe and I'll let you know when new ones are posted, I'll help you moving forward. I want to thank you very, very much for coming today. I want to thank all the people that allowed me to interview them before I came to town. And I especially want to thank my pal Paul for giving me the shout to come out today. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you. I hope we can meet again under better circumstances when I can see all of your faces. Thanks, everybody. Paul, do you have an announcement? You want to tell them about what's happening now? Here, this.
Thanks, Mike. Let's give Michael a round of applause. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.